Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Badlands Sci-Fi And Dystopian Shorts podcast. If you'd like to submit a story to our podcast, please send it to thebadlandsshorts@gmail.com, preferably in a PDF file. Today we have the first part of Hollow Sky by Neil Ashdown. I've decided to break this up into 2 parts because it's a bit long for one episode. So today will be Hollow Sky Part 1. Enjoy. Chapter 1. We found a narrow slice of shade under an outcropping of rock. The sun was reaching its apex and we were being slowly cooked out in the open. As we slipped into the cool shadow, I pulled down my protective goggles and gestured to Max to do the same.
Pop, I'm thirsty,
he complained. It had been 5 days since we'd seen any water, and the fear began crawling up my spine like a cold sweat. We'd used the mag filter several times in the last 2 days, but I knew there was a limit to how many times we could clean and reconsume our own urine. I heaved the dusty pack off my back and scanned the horizon around us as I unfastened the top flap. Max squatted to the floor and sat down, trying to shrug his own pack off. His lips were starting to look cracked, and he had uneven sun damage on his face, where his battered cap had failed to cover all the angles. At 8 years old, he had the gait, attitude and appearance of a much older child. I pondered his life as I dug around for the mag filter. He'd never experienced all the trappings of what I considered to be a normal childhood. Daycare, jungle gyms, little league, gaming, riding a bike for fun, not just to escape something awful. Maybe because he'd never had it, he didn't miss it. I regularly mourned my old life. Cold beer, Saturday morning lions, riding my Indian motorbike in the early morning before the world woke up. I kept it to myself, though. There would be no point in telling Max. He wouldn't get it, and it would just illustrate to him that he'd missed the best times and was now stuck here in this scorched hellscape. I felt the mag filter with my probing gloved hand in the pack and carefully dragged it out. I set it on the ground and got to my feet, taking my gloves off so I could unfasten my fly. I picked up the mag filter and depressed the top switch and watched the filter come to life and open up. I was immediately hit with a stale waft of urine. I aimed at the aperture at the top of the unit and felt my bladder relax. The stream of piss was initially chaotic, and I lost some to the side of the filter and managed to wet my fingers whilst gripping the unit.
God damn it,
I cursed, making sure the rest of the stream made it into the filter aperture. The urine was becoming quite dark now. Not the colour of iced tea, but certainly approaching it. I figured we had another 2 days of this before my kidneys started aching, and the filter started jamming on the particulate in the increasingly scant urine. I finished up and turned to Max.
You got any?
Yeah, I guess so,
he said, getting to his feet. He unzipped his fly and I handed the filter to him, gesturing with my eyebrows to be very careful. He also managed to piss on his fingers a bit, but added a decent amount to the hopper tank in the filter. I took it off him when he was done and closed the hatch on the top. I flicked the filter button and the unit started to buzz. In another life, it would have reminded me of standing in the line at Starbucks as a ponytailed barista expertly worked the coffee machine to produce a delicious cup of black goodness. The end result of our buzzing mag filter was body temperature water, flash sterilised with a slight taste of copper pennies. Max had already retrieved his tin cup and stood next to me expectantly waiting for the cycle to complete. The buzzing ceased and the unit let out a feeble hiss. As usual, I got Max to go first, and he placed his cup under the tiny push tap on the bottom of the filter. I squeezed the button on the top of the tap, and a steady stream of clear water began to flow into Max's cup. I could see him salivate, and he began to fidget, his patience obviously wearing thin. Imagine this being the highlight of your day, a cup of tepid filtered piss. My heart ached for him. Ah! Max let out a sigh as he finished the cup. I laughed and filled my cup with the remainder of the water. It was about 2 egg cups worth. Not enough. It would have to be enough for now. We'd lose about 25% of the volume each day through sweating. Tomorrow I'd get 1 egg cup's worth. And the next day? Max tipped the cup again, holding it aloft and trying to shake the last drops of water from the cup into his mouth. I slid the catch on the soil compartment and tipped the filter unit, slapping it slightly to help the collected sediment leave the small chamber. I mused as to the makeup of this sediment, separated from the urine. Some salts, metals, urea, probably some elements that we'd struggle to replace. A few weeks ago, we'd found some vitamin supplements and we'd managed to give ourselves diarrhea from the sudden influx of nutrients. I stuffed the filter back in the pack and fastened the flap tightly. Chapter 2. I took the battered mini binoculars from my breast pocket and carried out a quick scan of the visible horizon. Dead trees jutted out of the ground like ancient broken teeth, and a few burnt-out and abandoned houses littered the landscape. There was vegetation, but it was obviously struggling with the elevated UV light. No signs of life, just the way I liked it. I patted the Ruger LC9S nestled in its thigh holster. I had only 4 rounds left, but it was normally just as a valuable and a visible deterrent to anyone thinking of trying their luck. Max and I had been roaming the Western Scorch for about 2 years now. We scavenged auto parts and copper wire where we could. I'd become quite proficient at reconditioning starter motors and alternators, and it was a skill I'd begun to tutor Max in. We'd find and repurpose various brush sets, bearings and the like, rebuild and bodge any and all alternators and starters, and then sell the finished units in the Astoria barter market. We'd gotten fairly good at it, and were beginning to forge a sturdy reputation amongst Astoria's automen. In my pack now, I was carrying 4 alternators, a handful of spark plugs, and a bundle of copper wire stripped from an old telephone exchange box we'd found untouched in Tillamook. Max carried fuses, a few packs of diodes, and 2 flare cartridges we'd stumbled across in a bungalow garage in Manzanita. We heaved our packs back on, me lifting Max's up for him as he jostled into the arm straps. I scanned around us one more time before we stepped out of the shade and both pulled our goggles back on. We marched in single file, Max periodically checking our 6 and reporting any action or disturbances. Today, to my relief, there were none to report. We were careful not to march too fast or too intensely to minimise any sweating. Even more important than finding more swag now was finding some water, and at this point I'd settle for a muddy puddle. In the near distance I could see the vague outline of a small town. Small columns of smoke arose at random points, but the heat shimmer stopped us from gaining a clear picture of what was going on. After another 2 hours of marching in silence through the dusty scrub that had once been fertile farmland, we reached the town limits. A smashed sign had random letters left on it. S and a C, another O, an S, and an E. I guessed it must be Scarpoose. I'd never been before, not even in the old days, but I'd seen it on road signs. I knew nothing about it really, or what we might find here. Max looked at me as I studied the sign, but I shrugged and we continued towards the town. The sun was low in the sky now as we reached the first buildings on the outskirts of the town. The former heat was mellowing into a soft glow, and I felt cooler air rising up my sleeves. A knot began to tie itself in my stomach as we were swallowed by the town, and I scanned behind us looking for hiding places, should we need to retreat in a hurry. I gave Max a cautious glance, and he nodded at me in recognition, unclipping the holster on his knife. all the while scanning right and left. My tongue was dry like cracked earth, and I felt a dull pain in my lower back. My thirst was beginning to make me desperate. Soon that would affect my discipline, my attention. Chapter 3. As we shuffled towards the centre of the town, Max tugged on my jacket and pointed down an alley, where an old 20s GMC Sierra lay forlornly on its belly, its wheels long since departed.
There might still be a lumen there,
I said, looking around me. I was always paranoid that we had eyes on us, and it was a paranoia that had served me well.
Stay shot,
I said, pointing at my eyes as I crossed the street towards the sad-looking hulk of the Sierra. Max scanned the road around him and began to look for a scouting position. I heaved my pack onto one shoulder and then down into the crook of my arm, scrabbling with my free hand for my pick and toolkit. I heard the percussive mouth click that Max made when he was in position. I looked around me but couldn't place him. 2 more clicks and I realised that he was above me. I peered upwards and saw him on the flat roof of a derelict diner to my left. It was a smart move, but I was now concerned about the integrity of that roof and its ability to hold him up. He caught my eye and made the OK sign, touching the tips of his thumb and his forefinger together. I nodded in acknowledgement and turned back to the task in hand. Peering through the smashed window of the Sierra, I noted that the dash was still largely intact. The interior was filthy and both front seats were missing, but behind that crappy plastic dash lay a gold mine, or rather, a copper mine. I toyed with the idea of dismantling it carefully, but given the uncertain nature of our environment, I opted for the heavy steel jimmy. I was unfamiliar with the Sierra model, but I located the dash seams underneath and went to work firmly but carefully snapping the tabs with the jimmy. I wanted to keep the wiring looms intact as it would be much easier to dismantle and save as much of the useful material as possible. Periodically, I peered out of the Sierra driver window to the rooftop to check on Max, who was dutifully surveying the street. Once the dash was popped out, I began removing switches, refastening them to the loom when it was done. Switches were always useful. I dug around in my pack for the wire cutters and began to excise the loom carefully, making sure to save as much as I could. I retrieved my picks and hex screwdrivers and removed what I assumed were some CPU units. We could figure out what they were for later. I heard 3 mouth clicks from Max on the roof. 3 clicks meant company. I stuck my head out the window and looked up at Max. With his 2 fingers he touched his cheek, then pointed down the street that we had walked down earlier, then held up 3 fingers. 3 people. I carefully and quietly edged backwards out of the Sierra, pulling the loom and stuffing the CPUs in my jacket pocket. Keeping an eye on Max, I stuffed the loom clumsily into the bag and then fixed my eyes on the opening of the alleyway. I quietly slipped my pack onto my back and gestured for Max to get back down to the street level. I was terrified he would be seen before he got here, and I unholstered the Ruger in readiness. I could now hear a smattering of voices in conversation and the scuffing of boots. Suddenly, from behind, I heard the crunch of heavy footsteps and swung around, heart in mouth, pistol raised to my chest level, ready to squeeze. It was Max showing me his palms in a easy gesture. I swore in a whisper and signalled him to come and crouch behind the Sierra, where I backed up and joined him. The voices became louder, as did the footsteps. I pulled down my goggles and peeked cautiously around the side of the Sierra to see 3 shabby souls walking past the mouth of the alley, laughing and joking with each other. As they passed, I noticed that 2 of the figures were augments. Tatty mech limbs clunked and whirred, glinting against the dying sun as they ambulated. And then they slipped out of sight. The voices began to fade, and I realised I'd been holding my breath. I looked at Max, and he gestured, wiping his brow in relief in a cartoonish fashion. I smirked and put the Ruger back in its holster.
This was a win.
I whispered to him as we got ourselves together, patting the pack. I adjusted my goggles and straightened myself out.
There are people here. There must be water somewhere.
I whispered.
Let's go find it, Pop.
he whispered back, smiling slightly with his dried, cracked lips. Chapter 4. My only job was to keep him safe, keep us together. A tall order in the world that had unravelled.
We're going to have to make contact with other people while we're here,
I said, flatly, stealing a glance at him behind me.
Sure, you think they'll be the good people or the bad people?
That's the thing. We'll only know when it's too late, so keep your eyes peeled.
We trudged towards what looked like the centre of town and started to smell wood smoke and see some lights inside buildings. The inconsistency of the lights suggested that they were candles or paraffin lamps. There was no buzz of generators or any signs of tech more advanced than wheelbarrows. But there was life. As we reached the end of the street, I noticed the view widen out into what looked like a square. I noted a few people around small fires and what looked like old-fashioned barbecues. A wafting of cooking meat permeated the air, and a long dormant memory of actually enjoying outdoor eating began to rattle around in my head. The crackle of boiling fat hitting coals, the hiss of beer bottles opening. I could feel eyes on me immediately. A few figures stood up around various fires and shuffled for weapons. I walked towards the nearest gathering and turned my palms outwards to show my peaceful intention. At least I hoped it would be interpreted this way. I could feel Max drawing closer in behind me as we approached the small huddle. With my palms facing forwards and my arms elevated slightly outwards from my body, I addressed the crowd.
Good evening, people. We're here in peace.
I opened with,
Just passing through.
We ain't got nothing. What do you want?
grunted one of the men who'd stood up immediately on seeing us enter the square. He thumbed a holster, mostly concealed by his coat.
Relax, Chief. The only thing we're after is a bit of water. Don't matter if it's dirty, just some water.
I tried to reassure the small crowd. They eyed me suspiciously and looked at one another.
There's a lake at the end of Terrence Avenue. It's nearly dry, but you'll get something. And then you'll move on.
He drawled, not breaking eye contact, but pointing to the road with one hand.
Sure thing, Chief. We're just mighty thirsty right now. We'll be out of your hair in no time.
The man put one arm in the air and made a gesture raising two fingers, then a fist, then raising the two fingers again. The figures stood around other fires watched, acknowledged and slowly began to sit back down, returning to their cooking. Me and Max backed up slowly, palms still outturned.
Thank you, my man.
I said, and began to turn on my heels, putting out a cursory hand to make sure Max was right behind me. We walked calmly but purposefully towards the road leading off the square, gestured to previously by the man. Everything was calm for now, and we picked up our pace as the square receded into the distance behind us. My mouth began to salivate at the prospect of water, and as we reached the end of the road, I saw what looked like a dry lake bed in the fading light beyond the mouth of the road. Max started to run ahead of me and jumped from the cracked pavement circling the lake into the dry, dusty-looking bed.
Careful, Max. That ground could soften up towards the middle.
I warned, looking around before I joined him. The dirt darkened as we progressed towards the middle, and soon we were trudging through softer ground, then wet mud, and soon enough a shallow covering of water. Max clapped his hands together and smiled at me with unbridled joy. I smiled back involuntarily, and my heart warmed to see him smile for a change. He should be smiling all day, but our reality meant it was becoming a rare jewel for both of us.
Let's go, Pop.
He implored, but I wanted to go a bit deeper, to find clearer water to scoop into the mag filter. After a short while, I decided this was to be the compromise between deeper water and my gnawing thirst. I shrugged my pack off and got Max to hold it out of the water while I rummaged around. First of all for the Geiger pen. We could filter out just about any toxin or poison, but radioactive particles could not be distilled or filtered out. I primed the pen and dipped the end into the water. A score below 15 was optimal. Below 30 was okay for one chamber full. Anything above 40 was dangerous, and 60 or above was life-shortening to lethal. The pen pinged and I held it up to try and see the tiny LCD screen. 35.
Fuck, that's not good.
My kidneys ached on cue and I realised we had no choice. I put the pen back in the sack and rustled around for the filter unit. Max's gaze was fixed on the filter and his eyes took on a faraway look as I opened the top flap and submerged the unit to fill the chamber up with the dirty, irradiated water. I closed the flap and started cycling the filter. The familiar buzzing prompted Max to scrabble around in his pack to retrieve his tin cup. The filter hissed as the unit cooled the distilled water through its minuscule Freon coil. It was never chilled, but it decanted steadily at more or less room temperature. Max looked up at me and held out his cup. I gestured for him to place the cup under the tap, and soon he was guzzling the contents of his cup, laughing softly to himself.
Good?
I asked, smiling.
Amazing. Can I have some more?
He asked, and then tipped the last drops into his upturned mouth.
Sure thing. Let me have some first, though.
I said, once again submerging the unit into the water. After I'd sunk my first cup, I repeated the process another 4 times until we were sated. We then filled our canteens, 3 each, and both belched up air as we worked, stopping to laugh occasionally if one of the belches was particularly percussive.
When are we going to eat?
Asked Max as we walked towards the far shore of the lake.
Let's find somewhere to sleep, and I'll see if I can find us something.
I told him, as I scanned around for a woodland. There was water here, so the chances of finding trees, non-dead trees, was higher. Where there were trees, there were rodents. And where there were rodents, there was potential hot meals. Meat, protein, fat, something that wasn't boiled leaves or buckwheat bread. We were already rake thin. Max was like a strip of jerky. My once muscular arms and legs had thinned out to broom handles. My pants were tied up at the top with a string and cable ties, and under my ragged beard I could feel the skin stretch thin over my skull. The hunger kept us sharp and filled us with a desperate energy, but I was beginning to disintegrate. I could feel it clawing away at me slowly. When we were back in Astoria, I would fish and occasionally catch something. A few weeks' rest meant stocking up on protein and all the water we could drink. The radiation levels in the water were still elevated, but were crystal mountain clear compared to the tainted sludge that we just filtered out from the dried lake.
Look, a forest!
Shouted Max, stirring me suddenly from my thoughts. I looked back to see him pointing at a sickly-looking copse. The trees, whilst not dead, were certainly not looking very healthy. Maybe alive enough to sustain some critters, edible critters. My mouth began to water involuntarily. I nodded to Max, and we started towards the copse, night falling around us rapidly. I was hoping for a squirrel, but they tended to sleep at night, so if we were lucky, we'd perhaps find a rat. Again, my mouth watered at the prospect. I pushed the desperation from my mind, my mouth watering from the prospect of a poorly gutted and cooked rat. It was pathetic, but here we were. Once inside the small patch of trees, maybe 30 or 40, we quickly unrolled our dirty sleeping rolls and lay flat to the ground. I retrieved my small trigger crossbow awkwardly from the pack and scrabbled blindly around in the bottom of the pack for the thin bolts. All of the constituent parts were just the wrong shape to place in and fetch out of a bag. The whole thing was barely bigger than a toothpick crossbow, but it had been very useful for hunting anything small like squirrels and rats. I'd once even managed to take down a small fox with it, but the bolt was so small it had lodged in the poor mite's head without killing him immediately. I followed him for half a mile as the life slowly drained out of him. He'd eventually lain down and curled up, as if to sleep. The resulting food had left a bitter taste in my mouth, but I'd come to realise that the moral compass was tarnished for everyone these days. Eat or be eaten. With the tiny crossbow assembled and primed, I lay on my belly in the dark and began to scan the woods in front of me. Thankfully, it was a fairly clear night, and the moon cast weak rays of light through the trees. Max knew to remain perfectly still and quiet during these stakeouts. The more still we remained, the quieter we lay, the greater the chances of us eating that night. For 2 hours, not an insect moved in that copse, probably not a single microbe. Eventually, I heard a rustling as I was beginning to nod off. I couldn't see anything yet, but something was moving. The rustling continued straight ahead of me, and soon enough I could see movement. At first it was just tiny changes in the light reflecting off leaf litter, but then I saw it. An unusually fat-looking rat. Somebody had been dining well, I thought, as I squinted one eye and began to line up the bolt and the primitive crosshair on the stock of the crossbow. My finger slid over the trigger, and when in place, I slowly began to apply pressure. I waited for my prey to stop moving momentarily, made one final tiny adjustment in my aim, and squeezed the trigger gently. The bowstring snapped and the bolt flew whistling as it tore through the air. The bolt struck the rat squarely in the neck, and he gave off a very truncated squeal before falling silent. I looked back at Max lying on his bedroll, and he smiled, giving me the thumbs up.
One more, or eat now.
I whispered to him.
Eat now.
He whispered back to me, as loud as his whisper would go. I smiled. He was right. It had been days since we'd eaten any meat, maybe even a week. I pushed up to my knees, got to my feet and stumbled towards where the rat lay slain. I picked it up by its tail, and as I turned back I could see Max had already started gathering kindling for a fire. I pulled out my folding knife from my pants pocket and began to prepare the sad-looking beast. I made a shallow cut across its belly and began to peel the skin upwards towards the head, and then the lower portion towards the hind legs. I then made another shallow cut along the length of its abdomen, making sure not to puncture the intestines below. I prized open the little ribs and began to see why the rat was fatter than usual. It had a string of tumours hanging off its internal organs. I was butchering a cancerous rat. How desperate was I at this point? There was little point in holding out for prime butchery while we starved to death, I mused. I could smell the damp kindling beginning to take flame and could hear Max blowing on the struggling flames to furnish them with oxygen. I cut carefully around the innards of the rat and gently pulled them out of the abdominal cavity, tumours and all. I threw the innards back into the wood so another animal could make use of them. Normally I would keep the liver, but this rat was not in good health, so I decided against it. I removed the head, arms, legs, and then looked for a green stick to splint it, ready for cooking. Max had established a decent fire by now, and walked off again to gather some bigger pieces of wood ready for burning.
I need some sticks for posts as well,
I said, as he wandered around. Pretty soon we were up and running, our rodent guest gently cooking over the embers. I twisted the spit constantly to get an even roast, and the smell emanating from the fire made both of us fidgety with hunger. Soon enough we were munching through the greasy victuals, and all too soon it was gone. Max licked the spit stick to clean the last traces of fat and tossed the stick into the dying fire.
Not half bad, huh?
I asked, smiling. Max made the chef's kiss gesture with his hand and collapsed back onto his sleeping roll. We drank from our stores and settled down to sleep.
Pop, tell me about Mom again,
said Max in the darkness. He faced me from his sleeping position, and the occasional pop and glow from the fire lit his face.
Which one do you want to hear?
When she took me to the ocean,
he answered without hesitation. I smiled sadly to myself and began to recall that day.
Okay, you sat comfortably? Got your popcorn from the foyer?
I asked.
What's that?
He retorted with a note of confusion.
Never mind. You were 18 months old, and we decided it was time that you saw the ocean. We packed the car with all the kinds of stuff we thought we'd need. I drove up front, and your mum sat in the back with you, all wrapped up. I liked this arrangement, as it meant I had to pick the music on the stereo. None of your mum's R&B stylings. Anyway, we made the journey, your mum playing Boo with you and singing along badly to the tunes on the stereo. She was good at so many things, your mom. Singing was not one of them. Anyhow, We got to the beach just after noon, and we took our blankets and towels down near the break. Your mom carrying you at first, then letting you toddle on the warm sand. All at once she made a break for it and started sprinting, toddler style, towards the water. Your mom dropped the picnic stuff and started after you.
Max laughed at this, and I chuckled along with him.
She was laughing at first, but it turns out you were pretty rapid on the sand, and you were getting away from her. She stopped laughing and tried to kick off her flip-flops. It was quite a sight. She finally caught you just as you reached the wet sand and swung you up in her arms away from the water. You kicked your legs and screeched. You were not happy about having your bolt for freedom curtailed. We spent the day there, under the parasol. Your mom made sandcastles that you immediately stomped. She fed you strawberry ice cream from the men who walked up and down the beach. It melted as quickly as she could shovel it in, and you ended up wearing half of it on your face. You had a paddle, but your early enthusiasm evaporated when the cold water hit. Your mom picked you up and danced with you in the shallow waves. I can see it now like it was yesterday. On the way home, you shit your pants so badly, we had to throw away the clothes.
Max started laughing. I attempted to shush whilst trying to suppress my own laughter.
That's always my favorite part of the story.
He whispered loudly, bending double with continued giggles on his sleep roll.
Your mom was gagging at the stink and tried to hold her breath while we were cleaning you up. We drove the rest of the way home with the windows down.
The fire crackled and popped occasionally as it wound down, our stifled laughter turning to sighs, and eventually I could hear the steady rhythm of Max's sleep breathing. I pulled my blanket around my neck and pulled my woolen hat down around my ears, drifting away to sleep, thinking about Mary and Max dancing on the beach. Chapter 5. I awoke groggily to the sound of Max's stifled scream, the alien nature of it jolting me into action. My body, still drunk with sleep, did not obey, and I staggered to my feet only to be struck hard around the temple with something solid. I pitched forward, now dealing with the remnants of sleep and a concussion in short order. I looked around to see Max being held by the back of his neck and a pistol being shoved into the back of his skull. His captor was a filthy mid-30s man in a torn trench coat and combat pants. His greasy-looking beard and long hair framed a gaunt face and a mouth sporting an array of different-coloured, broken teeth. He wore a heightened, slightly crazed look on his face, and his eyes darted between me and another man stood next to him. The dark figure next to him sported some heavy mech augments, including some visible steel plates in his skull, one mechanical arm from the shoulder down, and a similar-looking mechanical leg from the knee down. As he shifted around, the gears whined and pneumatic lines hissed subtly to keep his stance optimal. I could see the telltale bulge of a sawn-off under his long military coat, and a knife sat holstered in his belt. The man who had presumably just kicked me in the head was now stood behind me with something cold and metallic pressed into the nape of my neck. I looked to my leg holster. The Ruger was gone. Is this what I could now feel being jammed into my neck? I'd managed to stagger upright to my knees despite constant pushing and jostling from the man behind me. He kept a hand on my shoulder to stop me rising any further. I fought a wave of nausea and tried to rally my brain into planning mode. Max was crying, staring at me imploringly from around 12 feet away. The augmented man had a cursory look through my pack and nodded approvingly.
"That's some nice spoils you've got, man. Thank you,"
he said mockingly, holding up the pack. I didn't care about the stuff. There was always more stuff.
"Take it all. Just leave the boy,"
I said.
"Oh, I will, thank you. I mean, not really in a position to negotiate here, are you?"
He scoffed as he dropped the pack unceremoniously to the floor. I racked my brain to try and formulate a way to extricate me and Max from this mess. What was in my pockets? Anything I could use as a weapon? I wouldn't have time or the requisite number of hands to unfold my pocket knife in time. I came up a blank.
Shall I waste 'em, Hal?
asked the trenchcoat thug, twitching agitatedly. I went to get to my feet and was struck around the back of the head with what must have been the butt of the Ruger. The world span and my ears flooded with a high-pitched ringing.
Dad!
Screamed Max, crying and struggling against the trenchcoat man's neck grip.
Don't let them hurt me, please.
The trenchcoat thug laughed and started mimicking Max's plaintive cries. Anger burned in my guts and it started to drive away the disorientation from the pistol whipping.
Not just yet, Morgan,
said the augmented man, who I now assumed was their leader.
He's quite a pretty little specimen. We'll find a buyer.
That was enough. I breathed deep, slow and steady. All of the noises surrounding me quietened and my muscles began to tense. I slowly moved my hand up towards the man's hand on my shoulder and in short order snapped his little finger back quick enough to break it instantly. I ducked to the right immediately, anticipating a trigger pull, but it didn't happen. He did, however, scream and struggled to pull the trigger. The idiot had left the safety on and in the panic had failed to realise. With my left hand, I struck my captor's wrist as hard as I could and he dropped the Ruger to the floor. I rolled forward, grabbing the gun from the ground and thumbed the safety off as I rolled onto my back. I squeezed the trigger firmly and the round struck my former captor in the shoulder, spinning him round through 90 degrees. I squeezed again, having more time to aim for this shot. The round entered through the bottom of his jaw, exiting out the back of his skull. It took most of the bone and tissue with it, forming a spectacular pink corona, highlighted by the morning sun. 2 rounds left. I rolled back over onto my belly and jumped to my feet, already propelling forward. Trenchcoat man was now holding the pistol directly down on Max's head. He was fidgeting spasmodically, his eyes trained on the leader. Max's face contorted in a silent scream. His eyes squinted shut, his bladder loosed and forming a dark streak on his filthy khaki pants. I began to sprint at Max, letting out an inhuman bellowing scream as my legs found purchase. The damp morning air instantly turned hot and acrid in my mouth, leaving a sour film at the back of my throat. I hardly even felt the shotgun blast that just about ripped me in half. Chapter 6. Was it the pain first, or the dull grey light? It must have been the pain. The pain dragged me out of the darkness. Its thick claws stabbed at my guts, forcing me to come back into the world. I didn't want to come back. I had to come back. I had to find Max. The thought made me try and sit up. A lightning fork of pain seared through my chest and abdomen, and I flattened back down on whatever it was that I was lying on. I still couldn't see. Was I blind? I could sense a dull light, but was it residual or coming through my eyes? The nausea came next, and as I moaned, I discovered I couldn't form proper words. I moaned and writhed around as much as the pain would allow.
Rest. You've had an invasive procedure,
said a low, gravelly voice. It didn't remind me of an old-times doctor, more like a mechanic or a nightclub bouncer. I tried to make the word Max, but all I heard myself saying was a mumbled,
"Here's something to help you sleep,"
the voice said, and then nothing, again. I awoke suddenly, still nauseated. I could see a shadowy figure leaning over the foot of my bed. As my eyes struggled to focus, I tried to make out my dingy surroundings. Was I in a field hospital? It certainly wasn't like any medical facility I'd seen before.
"Feeling better?"
asked the figure, in the now familiar gravelly tone.
Where am I?
I slurred weakly.
"I picked you up near Scarpoose. Well, most of you,"
he went on.
"You were dead for a little bit, but I managed to stabilize you with my cauterizer and a bunch of plasma."
He sounded pleased with himself.
My boy?
I said, grimacing, not really wanting to know the answer either way.
"Only you when I found you,"
he replied.
"Now listen. There have been some complications, some alterations. All of your large intestine, most of your small intestine are no longer with us.
What do you mean?
I stammered, my speech becoming more defined. The figure, who I could now see was a grizzled-looking man, perhaps in his early 60s, with a well-kept salt and pepper beard, looked back at me and swept the dirty blanket away from my torso. What met my gaze didn't make a great deal of sense. My abdomen was largely missing, replaced with a dark, ribbed, metallic-looking pipe, roughly the width of an old-style Maxi soda bottle. Was it jointed? One of my legs was gone, replaced with a mech augment. By the look of its condition, I was not the first owner. My other leg appeared to be my own, if a bit damaged and featuring an exosplint. My genitals were completely absent. At first I stared dumbly down at my body. Not even my own body, I surmised. My left arm was gone from the elbow down, replaced by a metallic-looking lower arm and hand. I went to move my fingers individually on the alien limb and was morbidly fascinated when they responded to my thoughts.
Now there will be a period of adaptation. The good news is you'll never have to wipe your ass again.
He laughed, seemingly pleased at his own macabre joke.
You'll subsist on a modified starch paste. Very low residue. Your bloods and fluids filtered and recycled by an adapted array of mag filters.
Why not let me just die?
I croaked, rapidly entering a grieving for my former body.
Well, that's the thing. Technically, you now belong to me. These augments aren't cheap, and they sure ain't easy to install. You owe me,
He stated, looking into my eyes.
Fuck it. Unplug me. Take your parts. I'm done.
I spat, meaning it.
Everyone says the same thing at first.
He said, lowering his eyes and pushing off from the end of the cot to walk the room.
I think I know where your boy might be. I don't know if he's alive or he's being traded, but I can point you in the right direction.
He started.
I'll give you this opportunity to make things right, make things even. Then you come back to work for me.
I fantasized about snapping his neck with my fancy new hand.
Just in case you were entertaining any ideas about confronting me, give those up now for both our sakes. I have a 2-step protocol to protect me. The first step is this,
He said, holding up a dirty handset.
2 rapid clicks of this button and poof. A small implanted charge near your hippocampus pops. You meet your maker and I find a new recipient for those augments.
And the second step?
I asked. He swiped his handset to reveal a heart trace and vitals readout on a screen.
My heart stops. Your head pops.
He smirked, making the hand gesture behind his head.
Let's concentrate on your boy for now.
He redirected, changing physical tack across the room, returning to the foot of the bed.
My name is Brandrick,
He said.
What shall I call you?
Manny.
I said reluctantly.
No, I don't like it. You'll be called Kappa from now on.
And there it was. My son was gone, half of my body was gone, and now my name was erased, washed away in an instant. I knew there was no point arguing, but I said my own name to myself in my mind, over and over, as an act of defiance. Chapter 7. Over the next 4 days, Brandrick schooled me on my new body, its limits, its strengths, how to maintain the augments. He fed me the snotty paste that would be my food from now on. It was disgusting, oily and sweet. True to Brandrick's word, I didn't shit. I didn't have an arsehole. In a strange way, I missed having an arsehole. It's the kind of thing you're troubled by daily and would happily be without, until you actually are without it. On the plus side, my augment arm was incredibly powerful. I could suspend my entire body weight from it and crush objects with the digits. These new limbs were supported from a Trentium power cell nestled in my metallic abdomen. Brandrick told me that if it was damaged or cracked, it would rupture at a temperature of about 5,000 degrees centigrade. He assured me this was a very bad thing. He had me running drills with my new limbs. I looked like a cross between a newborn deer and a boot camp inmate. Pretty soon I had become accustomed to their feel and capability, but their appearance still jarred me every time I stared down at myself. This was for Max. I was going to find him, wherever he was. I pondered, would he be horrified by my new appearance? Would he still believe it was me under the augments? I'd been working out what would have been considered naked to my old body. I asked Brandrick for clothes and he obliged with a tattered and fairly grimy wardrobe selection. Old khaki combat pants, a dark green sweater with a large stain on the front. I added some gloves, a pair of old tactical boots, one size too big, and a black canvas military jacket, featuring what was presumably vintage bloodstains and a few ragged tears. We sat out on a rotting wooden bench outside his main building, the evening sun sinking towards the hill in the west.
You feel ready for what's to come next, Kappa?
Asked Brandrick as he portioned out some of the emulsion that was now my food. He handed me the loaded syringe and I emptied it quickly down my throat, hoping to avoid the now familiar taste of oil and faint sweetness. It was nauseating, but I was forced to trust Brandrick's assertion that this was the only way.
I don't know what I'm up against,
I said, swallowing down the last of the paste.
The one scumbag around here who pulls these kind of attacks is holed up around 20 miles from here, near an old town called Bacona. He goes by the name of Hale,
explained Brandrick.
I know him.
I spat, looking down at my torso.
You do that?
Brandrick asked, pointing a grizzled finger at my missing abdomen. I nodded, meeting his gaze. He winced, his hand dropping.
You'll be fixing to put him down then,
he continued.
I want my boy back. That comes first. But yeah, I'll have no problem snuffing him out,
I replied through a clenched jaw.
You'll need a few toys. I'll go look in the armory,
he said, getting to his feet and striding back inside the building, the steel door clanging against the frame behind him. The next morning, I stood in the cool, damp air outside the infirmary room where I'd been bunking. Brandrick had supplied me with a malodorous kit bag to carry my meagre luggage, so I laid out what I needed to take out on the bench and began packing it into the bag. A quart of the disgusting emulsion food in a cloudy plastic bottle, a syringe to administer it, a small plastic bottle of water, a mag filter somehow even older and more decrepit than my own one, a compressed gas pistol with a handful of rounds wrapped in a cloth. There was an impractically large hunting knife in a textile sheath, and a length of wire with a loop at each end. I understood this to be a garrote. Hale had at least one of his goons left, the trench-coated man that had been incapacitating Max. I wasn't sure this paltry stash would be sufficient to take down one person, let alone more, but by the same light, if I was to be walking 20 miles, I wasn't sure I'd be able to carry anything more significant. The final item gifted to me was a pair of binoculars, solar-powered digital zoom and night vision enabled. These were probably the best bit of kit here. I slipped them into the chest pocket of the grubby military jacket and buttoned the flap. Brandrick appeared from behind the steel door to his area of the building and walked out onto the loose gravel. He sniffed and spat on the ground and looked at me.
You set, Kappa?
It's Manny. Go fuck yourself.
I thought silently.
As much as I'll ever be,
I said.
Armed with a pea shooter and some colorful language. Who's gonna stop me?
I joked, blackly, picking up the sack and slinging it over my shoulder.
It's painted where I think they'll probably be,
said Brandrick, as he passed me a small silver metallic square. On closer inspection, it was a small tablet with a paper-white screen. On the screen, a small arrow pointed away from the camp. As I shifted the tablet around, the arrow shifted so it was always pointed in a constant direction.
Okay,
I said, looking up to meet his eyes.
Fend your boy,
said Brandrick.
We have work to do.
I'm going to rescue my son, not avenge him.
I corrected.
And anyone that gets in the way is going down.
So be it.
He said, and spat once more on the dusty shale.
Just don't get any grandiose ideas.
He continued, tapping the side of his head with his finger. I turned and began to walk, my new limb whining and clunking in rhythm as I found my pace. Chapter 8. My old goggles sat snugly around my eyes. As the sun reached its highest point, I toyed with the idea of removing the jacket in the heat, but thought better of it. I'd only have to carry it anyway. The tablet guided the way, across the scrub, through a dried riverbed, maybe the Columbia River, and eventually through a dying forest that began to gain altitude. As dusk approached, I crested a bluff and looked down upon a scruffy town in the near distance. Was this Bacona? I rechecked the tablet, and sure enough, the arrow pointed directly ahead. I retrieved the binocular set and fiddled with the magnification settings. Through the viewfinder, I could see it only had 20% battery remaining, and I cursed myself for not using the solar charging during the day when the sun was plentiful. I trained the binoculars on the town and began to scan systematically for movement, for people. My vantage point wasn't perfect, but the elevation meant I could see more than if I was any closer or any lower. After the battery percentage dropped to 10, I powered the unit down and left it to bask in the dying light. This was not an ideal place to camp. The tired brush and dying trees offered little real cover, but my options were limited at best. I felt lethargic and heavy and decided to retrieve some of the emulsion from my sack. I missed looking forward to food, and this sad ritual was more like oiling an axle than indulging in a tasty meal. After I'd chugged down the slop, I sipped some water, but curiously found myself more or less unthirsty. As the sun disappeared behind the hills to the west, I packed the binoculars in the sack and tried to fashion it into a pillow. There was a damp chill in the air, and I began to regret not packing a mat or a blanket. I was so fixated on finding Max, my ability to plan effectively had been compromised. My feelings of fear and anxiety regarding Max were sharply tempered with guttural rage. I fantasized about killing Hale, which method I'd use, whether I would entertain his pleading, whether I would take a trophy. It was totally unhealthy, morbid, but it was the only thing that would stop me thinking about Max, specifically the murdered version of Max, ragdolled by his captors, or sold on as food or for leisure. Stop it, I told myself, when these cancerous thoughts began to spread across my brain like black tendrils. I returned to more comforting thoughts of garrotting Hale and burning his corpse as I began to drift unevenly off to sleep. Chapter 9. I awoke at dawn with a start and scrambled around to make sure I was still alone and that my possessions were still with me. Everything was here, and I relaxed for a moment or two before rustling around in the pack for the binoculars. It was still too dark to see anything in the town with regular optics, so I switched to night vision and found that there was an option for thermal imaging. Almost immediately as I'd switched this function on, the binoculars peeped to warn of low battery, 9%. I scanned street by street and noticed clumps of thermal signatures dotted around, most of them dying fires, some with dimmer static human figures lying around. Sleeping people, presumably. At the centre of the town there was a large industrial building, maybe an old bus station, dotted with several thermal signatures. People, fires, and something more complex. Maybe a boiler system or a generator. If Hale was holed up somewhere, it was most likely here, I decided. The binoculars peeped again and promptly died. Obviously the thermal imaging was power hungry. I decided to wait for the sun to appear and maybe charge the unit for a while before I moved into the town. I retrieved the gas pistol from the sack and popped the mag. In addition to the handful of projectiles I'd wrapped in the cloth pouch, I noted that the mag was also full of the spherical metal beads. The gas charge also seemed to be nearly full, I deduced as I held it to the light to see the liquid sloshing generously in the translucent cell window. I would have preferred my old Ruger, or to be honest, any regular pistol, but this would have to do. I thumbed the safety switch and held the pistol at shoulder height, aiming at a sickly-looking tree trunk nearby. I squeezed the trigger, and the pistol kicked back with a hiss and a thunk. The projectile slammed into the trunk, showering wood splinters in a neat arc. Surprisingly powerful, I thought, for something that looked like a toy, but I guess that power dissipated rapidly with increasing range. It was going to have to do. I re-engaged the safety and slung it back into the pack. One of the mag filter units on my abdomen hissed and the flap ejected a small puff of particulate. This is what passed for my morning poop now, I thought. Not like the old days, luxuriating on a porcelain throne, reading a muscle car monthly, while the coffee brewed outside on the kitchen counter. The sun began to warm my little spot, and I nudged the binoculars so the solar cells were in an optimal position to charge. I decided that I would try to find a forward operating position, closer to the town, with the most logical access to that bus station that I could manage without being detected. I would need an exfil plan. I would have to kill or disable anyone likely to follow me, and if those numbers were higher than I expected, I could be in trouble. If Max was still here, would he be able to walk? Would he be chained, or caged, or hurt? I didn't like the variables. Too many opportunities to get bogged down, possibly killed. If I'd had dedicated night vision goggles, I could have staged a nighttime raid using darkness as a cover. It was too late for if-onlys. Hale was the primary target. With him out of the picture, his ragtag hierarchy would most likely falter and disintegrate. He had to go first, but would no doubt be protected to some extent. How to enter the town without creating too much attention? Creep in slowly and carefully? Probably not enough cover for that. Approach at speed? Too aggressive. More likely to create an aggressive offence even before I'd made it to the bus station. I decided my best option was to shamble in like a weary drifter, weapons concealed, perhaps my face covered with some sort of head covering, not uncommon in these sun-baked times. My head still swimming with the endless permutations and possibilities, I gathered my meagre possessions up and started down the slope into the town, careful to use the brush and trees as cover. 20 minutes later, I started scouting for somewhere to set up my forward position, all the time keeping a keen eye out for movement and threat. All it would take is one observant scout to end my element of surprise. I'd end up walking into a kill box. I found a clump of trees, one of which was still just about alive, and dropped my sack down, taking the binoculars out of my jacket pocket and powering them up. I switched back to optical mode and began sweeping the town blocks and streets visible from this vantage point. I wished I'd still had the vista afforded to me earlier from the hill. This was much more restricted. The feeling of unease at my lack of observable space began to spread in the pit of my stomach. Returning the binoculars to my chest pocket, I retrieved the gas gun, putting it and the spare projectiles in a lower pocket. Next, the garrote, which I coiled up around my hand and slid into another pocket. I picked up the knife, but it was too unwieldy to secrete about my person. I unsheathed it and used it to cut out the lining from the backpack, fashioning it into a neat rectangle, which I then fashioned into a head covering. It smelled sour as I wrapped it around my head and up to my nose, leaving only my goggled eyes visible to the outside. I must have looked like a grubby Bedouin minus the camel. I tossed the knife onto the pack on the floor and straightened my clothes, patting each pocket to double-check my items. I prepared a syringe of emulsion and administered it, licking the disgusting remnants from my teeth. Then a swig of water, swelling it around my mouth before dropping the bottle to the floor. It was time to start. No more pontificating or planning. Every minute I wasted was another minute that Max remained in danger. Go time, I told myself. I stepped from behind the clump of trees and began making my way towards the rear of the first block of buildings. I estimated there were about 3 blocks between the perimeter and the bus station. I would aim to stick close to the buildings, avoiding open streets or anywhere I could be picked up by lookouts. The head covering, whilst affording me excellent cover, did restrict my view, especially upwards towards rooftops, where scouts would doubtless position themselves. The streets were eerily quiet here, but as I progressed I heard voices off in the distance. No words at this point, just the odd shout or whistle. I slid my hand into my pocket and ran it over the cool, smooth barrel of the gas gun. It felt heavy and reassuring in there. Now on to the next block, the voices became louder but no clearer. The words bouncing off the walls and windows of the building. I heard 2 clear staccato whistles, close and clear. I'd been made. I broke into a light jog and ducked into a side street, hoping to lose the scout who'd obviously seen me. The voices died away and I heard the scuffing of boots and the clanking of equipment. And then nothing. I had neither the weapons nor the manpower to mount an offence. I had to play smart. As I passed the door of one of the commercial-looking buildings, I tried the handle. It was locked. As I crept down the alley, I repeated this exercise several more times until eventually a door opened at the turn of the handle. The interior smelt stale, but as I entered cautiously, it seemed that it was empty. I backed in, keeping my eyes on the street, and left the door open a tiny crack so I could see anyone approaching from the east. Unfortunately, I was blind in the other direction. I heard more whistles as I waited and wondered if I'd been spotted. After a few minutes, I thought I could hear voices approaching, but not from the direction that I had eyes on. I heard muffled sentences and strained to make some sense of them. As the voices came closer, I began to make out the intent. If they were trying to maintain operational comms, they were doing a poor job. Their voices now loud and conversational.
Joan is a dumbass. He probably saw a trash bag blowing down the street,
I heard one of them say as they drew in closer. I started to back away from the door and pulled a pistol from my pocket. I reached about 10 feet away from the door with my back nearly touching the rear inside wall.
Hale said to shoot whoever it is. He ain't interested in any more parishioners, and we need some fresh food,
said the other voice. I imagined myself on a spit, roasting over a fire, my remaining flesh being picked clean by this bunch of degenerates. I thumbed the safety and it disengaged with a crisp click. I froze and the voices outside fell quiet. Time stood still and I was aware that I was holding my breath. I raised the pistol pointed towards the nearly closed door and braced my feet in a stable stance. My finger curled around the trigger and I applied the lightest pressure. The silence continued and I could hear a growing ringing in my ears. My heart thundered painfully in my chest. The tiniest noises were growing in volume to create an increasing cacophony. Sweat beaded on my neck and the adrenaline-fueled nausea hit me. Nothing happened. And then suddenly, the door burst open on its rattling hinges. I squeezed the trigger hard immediately, and the metal sphere that left the barrel of the pistol tore into the intruder's neck, spraying the open door with a fan of burgundy blood. The assailant choked, wide-eyed, and grabbed his neck with one hand, and with the other hand pointed his pistol at me. Before he could let off a round, I pumped 2 more metal pellets into his forehead. His face went slack, his arm dropped to his side, and he staggered, then fell forward.
God damn it, man,
shouted his compatriot. Scuffling sound of heavy boots running away bounced around the room, and I knew that he'd decided against coming at me. I put my pistol back in my pocket and patted down the body of the gurgling man lying face down on the floor. Nothing useful. I prized the pistol out of his hand and dropped the clip out. 2 rounds. I slammed the clip back in and put the pistol in the other jacket pocket. It was nearly too large and would probably fall out at the first sign of movement. The man on the ground was beginning to shout and cry. The pellets had probably only penetrated his frontal lobes, and the gash in his neck would take a while to kill him.
Sorry, man,
I said as I retrieved my gas pistol and sunk a round into the soft part of his brainstem. His body went slack and I heard the final ragged gasp of air leaving his lungs. I had to move. The second guy would be back with reinforcements, no doubt. I felt uncomfortable with killing, but in this environment, I reasoned that it was a necessary stepping stone to saving Max. These goons were not interested in talking, and I was not interested in surrendering. Pocketing the pistol, I peered cautiously around the ajar door and immediately got spotted. Another peal of staccato whistles sounding off above me. I ducked back inside and scanned the room, noting an interior door partially blocked by wooden boxes and a pile of filthy-looking rags. I scrambled over to it and began shoveling the obstacles aside with my hands. Once clear, I tried to turn the door handle, which failed to open the door. It was either broken or locked. I took 3 steps back and ran at the door, shoulder first. The door flexed slightly and threw me backwards into the room, where I overbalanced and fell on my arse. I scrambled to my feet, increased the number of steps backwards from the door, and launched myself again. This time the latch mechanism exploded and a small spray of splintered timber briefly filled the air as the door flung open violently. I stumbled through clumsily with the inertia and prayed the room wasn't filled with armed assailants ready for the kill. My initial strike would have given them ample warning of my arrival, but fortunately I discovered that the room was in fact not a room, but a corridor, littered with trash and empty crates. A thick layer of dust was settled on everything, and my rude entry into the space had kicked up a cloud that hung in the air. My org leg hissed slightly as I pivoted to gain my orientation. My mouth dry, head now beginning to stifle in the growing heat. I pulled off my head covering. Any sense of mystery or surprise was now fully spent. At one end of the corridor sat a fire escape door with a push bar, and I decided in the absence of any other obvious exit that I'd explore that first. Sickly light leaked in via the door I'd broken down and another glazed door along the corridor. On reaching the door, I gently gripped the panic bar with my human hand and pushed it gently down. It resisted and made a gritty, grinding sound as it depressed, but as it reached the bottom of the pitch, I felt the mechanism click and the door release from the frame. Very gradually, I eased it open a crack and lined up an eye to look out. I heard several voices shouting, the sound bouncing off reflective walls of the street. On the corner of the street, at the end of the wall I started down, I could see a ragged figure with a rifle standing lookout. I crept from the door and did my best to shimmy along the wall towards him. His back turned to me. He twitched, looking left and right, but thankfully not behind. As I approached, I prayed the subtle hissing of my org limbs would go undetected, and thankfully the chaotic waller in the street seemed to drown it out. When I was within a few feet of the rifleman, I pulled out the garrote and flexed it between my hands to gauge its diameter. I'd never used a garrote before, and the thought of it sickened me. In its favour, it was silent, and it would bring me one more step closer to Max. I breathed deep, threw the crescent of the garrote over the rifleman's head and onto his neck, and pulled back hard, causing him to drop his gun and begin clawing furiously at his neck. Something was wrong though. There was too much wire, and I couldn't tighten the grip sufficiently. He managed to loop a finger under the wire around his neck and began to pull with considerable force. I dropped to a knee, pulling him off his feet, and his finger slipped from under the wire. I crossed the wire over, rapidly swapping hands and tightening the loop as hard as I could, the plaited wire handles digging into the crooks of my fingers. With a sudden tightening, the rifleman began to flail his arms frantically, trying to make purchase on any part of my body. Anticipating this, I fell backwards, using his body weight not only as a counter, but also as extra weight with which I could suffocate him. To finish the act, I wrapped my legs around his arms as I lay on my back, his sagging weight lying on top of me. After another few seconds, he went limp, but I maintained the grip until I was sure he was dead. Exhausted, I rolled him off me and began to wonder why I hadn't simply used my new, augmented hand to crush his neck. Hindsight was rarely a useful teammate. I dragged his body back from the corner and then retrieved his rifle, a battered-looking antique M4 from the dirt. I checked the magazine, and by the weight, I guessed there were at least 8 to 10 rounds in it. I peered around the street corner, and I realised I could see the bus station at the end of the next block. Several people scuttling between vehicles and outbuildings. There was no question of a surprise attack. They were prepared, or preparing, for an assault. I counted at least 5 foot soldiers and no sign of Hale, or more importantly, Max. If I went in, all guns blazing, I'd be dead within seconds. If I went in hands raised, I'd most likely be tortured to death over several hours and then stripped for parts. I wasn't keen to explore either of these possibilities. I checked the roofs I could see from my position. No sign of a lookout and no telltale whistling. As I approached the corner of the next street, I could see two men entering the door that I had found earlier in the street behind, probably to be greeted by the body of their teammate. I pushed into the next street, now becoming dangerously visible to anyone paying attention in the bus station plaza. I'd obviously shaken the lookout, as I managed to progress undetected until I reached the shell of an old minivan. It had been stripped and the windows long gone, but it provided at least some cover. Now I saw him, Hale, walking across the plaza, barking orders at his ragtag minions. He knew something was coming. His org leg clunked against the asphalt, but he'd obviously worn it for a long time as his movements were fluid and natural. It looked almost identical to mine, and I pondered for a moment where these had come from. There were no production lines left, no factories. I was within firing range. I would have time to take out maybe one or two of them at this distance, but I knew the rifle or ammo might be faulty or miscalibrated. Would I simply give away my position and invite a hail of fire down on myself? I knew every minute I spent pondering and pontificating was another minute closer to them being coordinated and ready for any attack. I scanned around me and saw a building opposite with an exterior door. There would be no time to check it was accessible. I trained the M4 on one of the scruffy soldiers dragging sandbags across the plaza, and then looked for a secondary. Perhaps the other bag of bones dressed in a boiler suit smoking what looked like a pipe. I went back to the first target and sharpened my gaze on the iron sights, aligning the notch on the barrel with the two on the body. Using the windowsill of the wrecked car to steady the barrel, I breathed out as slowly as I could and squeezed the trigger. The deafening concussion made my ears ring. The sandbag man went down immediately without so much as a whimper, his face slamming dead weight into the asphalt. The scene froze, nobody seemingly able to grasp what had happened. Quickly, I switched to my secondary target and attempted to aim. He dropped his pipe and was scrabbling for his weapon. My breathing was ragged from the adrenaline and I struggled to hold the barrel steady. I squeezed again, and the pipe man span as I hit him, obviously in one shoulder or his flank. I attempted to aim again, squeezed, and the rifle jammed. The return fire began to hit around me, pinging off the metal of the car shell and digging into the masonry behind me. I hunkered down and readied myself to run. That door had better be open. I crossed the street, crouched and moving as fast as I could manage. My org limbs felt even more alien and awkward in this position, but I made it to the other side. I turned the handle. It was locked or jammed. I drew back my augmented arm and slammed the fist into the latch mechanism. It popped and splintered satisfyingly, and the door bounced off the jam and opened outwards. I dived inside, jerking my head from side to side to gauge the situation. No soldiers, but in one corner of the room, a dirty-looking middle-aged woman sat chained to a metal loop on the floor. We eyed each other, me with suspicion, her with fear. I walked towards her rapidly and she recoiled, visibly grimacing.
If I release you, are we cool?
I asked, reaching for the chain with my org hand. She nodded, still fixing me with a terrified stare. I shuddered to think of her purpose here in the camp and quickly pinched one of the chain links between my metallic fingers. It snapped like a pretzel, and she immediately began to pull the chain out of the metal loop. As soon as she was free, she backed away from me and made for a door on the other side of the room. She disappeared through it, and after scanning the window in the room, I followed her. By the time I'd reached the next room, she was already disappearing through the next door. I sidled up to the window in this room and realised it had a clear view of the bus station plaza. Several sandbag positions were dotted around the forecourt, and the corpse of the first soldier lay where he'd fallen. The pipe man sat on the floor covered in blood but apparently not critical. Another man attended to the wound on his shoulder with some dirty-looking bandages. As I scanned to the far right, I saw what appeared to be a GPMG nestled in a sandbag nest. A soldier was crouched behind it, and I realised with a sudden cold horror that he was staring straight at me through the glass. Almost simultaneously, bullets started to rip into the room, shattering the windows and hammering into the furniture and walls. The cacophony was brain-rattling. I dived to the ground, but not before 2 or 3 slugs hit my metallic arm, leg, and tore into my good shoulder. I stifled a scream and tried to breathe out the pain, but it hit me in waves. The GPMG felt silent, and I jumped to my haunches. I scrambled on all fours to the next room, where I nearly tripped over the bullet-riddled body of the woman I'd just freed.
God damn it.
I popped my head up into a window and caught sight of the machine gunner sweeping with a silent barrel. He caught sight of me and again released a few rounds, but the gun appeared to jam and I could hear his frantic swearing. This was it. I took a few steps back and threw myself through the panelled windows. I landed in a heap on the asphalt, 25 feet from the gunner, and the adrenaline sprang me to my feet. He was frantically retracting the bolt, trying to unjam the gun. I retrieved the gas pistol from my pocket and sprinted at his position, firing indiscriminately. His body jerked as projectiles hit, but nothing made real contact. I slowed my pace, took a moment to aim and fired. The resulting projectile struck him in the face. He screamed and dropped the gun. I slowed to a walk 10 feet from him and loosed 5 to 6 projectiles in rapid succession. 2 struck him in the neck, spraying blood into the air, causing him to stumble back, his screams dissolving into bubbling gargles as the tears in his neck poured blood into his airways. I reached his position to see the final 2 soldiers scrabbling towards me. I recognised one of them as the trenchcoat man that had held Max before he was taken. I sunk to my knees, pocketed my pistol and grabbed the GPMG body. Looking at the belt, I could see that it had become twisted over on itself. The 2 soldiers began to take aim with their pistols. I unfolded the belt and pulled it taut. A bullet whistled past my ear so close I could feel the heat from the disrupted air. I raised the barrel to the closest soldier and squeezed the trigger. The GPMG roared into action, thrashing and jerky in my hand. It ripped the first soldier nearly in half, and the hot barrel suddenly became superheated. I dropped it unconsciously and followed it down where I sprawled awkwardly on the ground next to the sandbags. More bullets pinged off the asphalt around me as the remaining soldier closed in. I dragged the barrel round to face him, rested it on a stray sandbag and opened up. The spray of rounds cut through the soldier's ankles and calves, felling him like a spring sapling. He screamed in agony as the ragged stumps of his legs scraped along the asphalt. I squeezed again and peppered his writhing body and skull with hot lead. For just a moment, silence descended. Only the crackling of the contracting metal from the gun barrel broke the spell. And then the steady high-pitched whistle of my damaged hearing. After a second or two, I began to hear a percussive sound, material against material. And again, it was a slow clap. And then I saw Hale, walking out of the bus hangar, grinning ear to ear, clapping slowly and sarcastically. Chapter 10.
Quite a show, stranger,
he exclaimed in a loud voice as he approached, maybe 20 feet away.
No need for any further violence,
He continued.
I'd say a conversation was in order.
I let go of the GPMG body and got to my feet, feeling the pistol with the back of my hand in my pocket.
You change your mind about no new people then?
I spat, watching his body language carefully.
Turns out some vacancies have recently opened up,
He said, smiling, gesturing to the body-strewn plaza with his hands.
What are you after, friend? We're peaceful here, just trying to get along.
He said, pretending to be earnest.
That's some bullshit, you know it. I know it. You're a scumbag thief,
I said, trying to contain my rage.
You know me, friend. We met before.
He asked, trying to get a closer look at me. I peeled my goggles up, resting them on my forehead.
Yeah, we met before,
I said, gritting my teeth. Don't let the rage run the narrative, I thought to myself. I rested my hand just above the pocket, slow and careful.
Hang on a minute,
He said, the broad grin reappearing on his grizzled face.
Are you the hero, Dad? Holy shit.
He asked, almost incredulously. That was enough. I snatched and drew the gas pistol and began firing even before I was able to aim. He ducked immediately and drew his own pistol. It looked like an old police special. One slug hit my org leg and immediately I could tell something had stopped working. The leg instantly became heavy, almost like it was glued to the ground. I turned my body in profile to reduce my target footprint. I aimed as carefully as I could and fired. A single slug struck him in the forehead, burying itself in a frontal lobe. I tried to advance on his position, dragging the heavy org leg behind me. He raised his pistol again, unable to aim properly but still managing to release a round that pinged uncomfortably off my metallic torso. I slapped the pistol from his hand and pistol whipped his bleeding forehead as hard as I could manage. He went down and spat and coughed blood onto the asphalt.
Kill me and you'll never find that boy,
he said, even managing a sick little chuckle. I grabbed his head by his greasy hair, forcing the pistol into his mouth. Be cool. Be cool. Find Max. I breathed out heavily through my mouth, trying to slow my thoughts. I wanted to kill this piece of garbage, but he was probably right. I took the pistol out of his mouth, heaved him over onto his back, and placed the pistol against his remaining human knee and pulled the trigger. His knee exploded inside his pants and he let out a pitiful scream. I then moved to his ankle and repeated the exercise. This time, he passed out. I dragged him by his org leg back to the bus shed. It was an awkward process as my org leg passed in and out of functionality along the way, causing me to stop and start. Eventually, inside the shed, I dragged him onto a chair and bound him using some copper cabling I'd found on a bench. I was exhausted. There was no sign of anyone else, and an eerie silence descended on the scene. It was cooler inside the shed, out of the glare of the sun, and a chill ran through me as I waited for Hale to regain his senses. After a few moments, my patience failed, and I hobbled towards him and slapped him with my human hand. My shoulder wound now throbbing with the effort. He started, waking with a jolt.
The fuck, man? What is wrong with you?
He slurred, lurching around in the bindings. He whimpered as he attempted to move his human leg.
Where is my boy?
I asked coolly, the rage resurfacing rapidly, as if just the thought of his name was enough to reignite the fire. I wanted to beat his face with the pistol. My boy. Breathe, breathe.
That's a fancy fucking leg, man,
said Hale, nodding at my org leg.
I bet I know where you got it,
he continued. I stared at him, unwilling to enter into unnecessary conversation.
It was Brandrick, right?
He said, taking confirmation from my blank expression.
Bet he told you that you belong to him, right? Little bomb in your head?
That's bullshit?
I asked, shocked.
No, that's actually true,
he replied, gesturing with his eyes at his metal skull plates.
Quite a bit of cowboy surgery to get that out as it happens. I have no sense of smell now because of it.
He flicked his eyebrows up wistfully. We were getting off track.
Where's my boy?
I repeated.
You know Brandrick is just a low-level slaver. He thought he could keep me leashed.
I slapped Hale firmly around the face.
God damn it, man. Okay,
he protested.
I can help you get that charge out of your head. You'd be a free man.
I raised my hand again and Hale cringed.
Okay, man, listen. It's an economy out here.
He tailed off. I raised my eyebrows and tilted my head to signal that any good graces I was willing to extend were about to run out, and violently.
We sold him. You know they're worth a lot in this climate.
The nausea rose in me and I felt the urge to beat Hale unconscious, to death.
They're worth a lot.
I grimaced and rapped my own forehead with my knuckle until both my knuckle and my head hurt. My punctured shoulder joined in the pain train, and all of a sudden I wanted to lie down and sleep forever. I gathered the pistol in my hand, reversed the grip so the handle sat in my hand like a neat little hammer. I jabbed Hale on the puncture wound on his forehead rhythmically with each word.
Where is my boy?
Hale knew he'd run out of wiggle room. He visibly exhaled and paused, probably wondering if these were his final moments.
We sold him to Pocky, out near Burns,
he said, looking at the ground.
He don't kill him, he'll still be alive.
I pushed away thoughts of what state he might be in. I clung to the thought that he was alive. This wasn't over yet.
I weren't lying about Brandrick neither,
he continued.
He's a scumbag. Why do you think you here? You don't care about justice, about you.
He went on.
He said you'd take me out using your boy as bait. I stopped paying Brandrick his tributes. Dug that charge out of my head. He wanted me off a goddamn chessboard, and now you've done the work for him.
He stared at the ground dolefully, defeated.
How far is Burns from here?
I asked, wearily, realizing I had more to do and no strength to get it done.
2 days on foot, maybe 3,
he said. Hale was done, his frontal lobe punctured and bleeding, his human leg shattered at my hand. Looking at this pathetic specimen bound to a plastic chair, I was all of a sudden washed over with guilt and sadness. In my rage and hatred, I'd tipped over the edge. I'd become the monster I feared and despised. Out here, the only thing separating me and these animals were the last shreds of humanity I'd kept close to me. The minute I'd felt the rage and welcomed it in, that humanity had evaporated, like morning dew, disappearing forever, invisibly into the air.
"Do me a solid, man,"
said Hale.
"Get Brandrick. Finish it."
He started to cry softly, tears boiling into dirt on the dusty asphalt.
I can do that,
I said slowly, as I shuffled round to the back of Hale as he sat bound to the chair. I raised the pistol to the soft part at the base of his skull and pulled the trigger. His body relaxed and slumped forward. I felt empty, hollowed out. No satisfaction, no reckoning, just a cold, empty blankness. Chapter 11. After gathering what weapons and ammo I could find and carry, I returned to my belongings on the outskirts of town. Something wild had obviously rifled through my pack, but everything still seemed to be there. I administered some emulsion and took a swig of water. I shouldered my pack and made my way back to the first buildings on the edge of town and found an open shop to bed down in for the night. In the morning, I took the mapping tablet out and used a large spanner to smash it until I was satisfied it was non-functional. I tensed for a moment, wondering if this course of action might trigger the charge in my head, but after a few seconds I was satisfied that any danger had passed. I spent the morning attending to my shoulder wound and attempting to repair my damaged org leg. I managed to botch a repair to a linkage that seemed to restore function, but I was dubious as to how resilient this mend would be. After searching properties for the whole of the rest of the day, I finally found an antique map framed on the wall of a stripped-out old hardware store. I smashed the glass in the frame and folded the map up. It was so old and dry that some of the hinges disintegrated as I folded it up, but it was serviceable. The next morning, I checked my new M4 rifle over and unloaded and reloaded the rounds in the magazine. I reloaded the gas pistol with my remaining projectiles and checked the gas level, a quarter full. When it ran out, I had nothing to refill it with. As the sun started to climb, I pulled on my goggles and headed out of the building. It was time to find my way to Burns, to find Pocky, to find Max. That concludes our reading of Part 1 of Neil Ashdown's Hollow Sky. Check back soon for Part 2. See you in the next one.
You are now leaving the Badlands.